I was So I was hoping that we could start with some general discussion. So I'm just queuing up a couple things from our last modularization session. And then I thought maybe some discussion at the front end, as well as discussion in groups later would be helpful, just as we're processing all of this information. So I'm going to briefly share my screen, which again means that I'm no longer able to see any of you, or I can see three of you. So I'm going to ask Stephanie if you could just keep your eye on the chat for me. I would appreciate that very much. I've figured out how to see it, but my multitasking skills might not be the greatest. So modularized syllabi in the context of your program. So we've been looking at the process of deconstruction and then reconstruction. And now we're going to examine everything within the different lenses of our program and the broader context. And, I thought there were some useful, for me, it was a really useful distinguish kind of language between variable credit and modularized courses that I just wanted to touch on again, as well as some kind of key things that we've been talking about. So one of the things that we want to keep in mind is that competencies within your courses should encompass all content. And so there might be individual reasons, there might be individual programmatic reasons, individual there may be individual reasons. So if you have content that's not aligned, so if your competencies, for example, align to half your program or 3/4 of your program, you might want to look again at the origin of those competencies. And is there some distinct reason why that additional content is there? Or sorry, the origins of that content. Competencies should generally only be represented once in your program. So if you have them populated in various points throughout your program, that would be a good thing to reflect on. And, we moved from that, introduced, developed, and assess. There was that whole macro analyses of syllabi that Kira led to within the context of competencies. A competency is the focus of assessment and assuming introduction, development, and assessment within the context of that individual competency. Variable credit and credit within modularized courses are two different things. And I thought, again, that our discussion about that last time was really clarifying for me, and it seemed like a robust discussion. So variable credit can promote, not prompt, but it could also prompt flexibility, as can modularizing. So they both are flexible approaches. One of the things to keep in mind about variable credit is that it can create challenges in alignment and program design. So for example, if you create an independent study that houses certain competencies to be responsive to the individual needs of a student, you want to make sure that they do not encounter those same competencies again. One of the big things that we want to strive for is eliminating program redundancies. And that last kind of key factor of consideration throughout everything that we're doing is alignment across the program pathway. And I think that really connects to the idea before it, that we want to make sure that while we are continuously looping back on information, reinforcing information across the context of the curriculum, once we've assessed it, we've assessed it. We're not having students go through that same information as much as the process or beyond the process of just good educational practices where you reinforce information as you go along. So I wanted to pause there and see if there were comments or questions or additional clarifying points that people would like to add, especially as you're diving into this work. Kira.
Donna, my wheels are spinning, and I just appreciate so much how you do these reviews, because it's so hard to get back in your mind where we were. I am struck in our program. I appreciate the understanding that the competencies, that whole idea of like, we are introducing, we're developing, we are then assessing. Where I struggle is when I think of our methods courses in our bachelor's program, where we have multiple classes related to the content areas. So we've got two different language and literacy classes, and one is more focused on language and lit, and one is really diving like into more of the writing and assessment. And then we've got a math methods class. We've got a couple different inquiry classes that are taken to social studies and the sciences. Then when I think of our curriculum competencies, we are hitting them in each of those classes, as opposed to one curriculum class where I hit all of those pieces in one class. I can see that if within my program, let me take my hand out, sorry. If I did have just one curriculum class, that would make sense. Or I had two curriculum classes that were covering all the content areas. But this is a shift in thinking. It's a shift in thinking that we would not be having them practice similar sorts of things. And of course, I actually just sent to Amy Kelly at Governor State, like how we are scaffolding the instruction of lesson planning across our program. I wrote her a long thing yesterday because she's interested in looking at that. And of course, we scaffold then those expectations. We're building on that understanding over time across those classes. And we collaborate, the faculty who teach those classes, we collaborate to ensure that we are not being repetitive in the pedagogical pieces that are just great pedagogy, and that instead it's really focusing then on that content specific pedagogy and increasing skill across the length of our program. So I struggle with that. I'm sorry. I struggle with that, of like that I would not be assessing in the same way. I don't know. I don't know if I can parse out those competencies in that way.
I think that is like the example you gave is an excellent example. And that's, those are CPD 4 and CPD 5, where there's that list of literacy, math, science.
The fine arts.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think your description as well as your solution still fit within the context of developing competencies. So one thing I'll mention, if we think about like those initial CPD 1 and CPD 2, that really connects to the idea of what you said about, those are really the foundational. When we went through the modularization project, or the modularized content project, for ECE, one of the decisions that was made is that all of those areas were broken out. And so there is kind of this accordion in the area of literacy. There's kind of an accordion, it just expands so much, because to treat all of those topics with the depth required, it's just a little bit different. And one of the points we're going to return to again today is that not all content within the competencies is the same. Some are huge and some are more micro. So I think the example and the way that you're designing it in programs still fits within the context of these general parameters. Other comments about that, Kira? Was that clarifying? I saw you do the okay.
Yeah, okay. My okays. No, thank you. This is something that we've grappled with, and we really worry about redundancy. And that's been a real focus in the last couple of years of just, how do we provide the kind of diverse experiences that candidates will need, the kind of experiences, with assessment that they will need. So it is not repetitive types of assessment across those classes, even though it's all related to better teaching and assessing overall. Right. So I appreciate that. Thank you, Donna.
Thank you. Other comments or insights or clarifications? Okay, I am hearing none, and I'm assuming there aren't hands up. I can't see any. So I want to revisit that, thinking about leveling. So one of the things that you did, and I'll just briefly show you this next slide that has this reconstruction worksheet. One of the things that you went through was looking at, the process of deconstructing your courses, and then the process of reconstructing. And that key column is where the level is. And so just thinking about leveling and where everything kind of breaks out. So we'll return to this, but reflecting on where levels are on your reconstruction worksheet, and do you see modularization by level? Do you see opportunities for that? And again, this is kind of a revisiting of previous content, but keeping in mind that your program and external factors are going to influence design. And we're going to spend a lot of time delving into that today. So, and I think that this is an important point. When I think, over the course of, my experience with instructional and program design, if I think of the learners and the field, if I use that as my target lens, things can be a lot clearer than, and I think about the program, but if you think about the learners and what they need in terms of clarifying credential pathways, the opportunity potentially to credential down, supporting a clear on-ramp that can potentially lead to credential attainment, I find that the most clarifying lens. If I think about, oh my gosh, that is going to be tedious. If I think about me, for example, it becomes a little bit, it's so clarifying, I think, to look at that. And then what strategies, and then kind of figure out okay, it's going to be tedious, but how can I parse it out? And what can I do to support my kind of unthinking of how things are now? Also, what strategies would serve your program most effectively? So the idea of clarifying credential pathways, recruitment, retention, and completion, and really examining those things and seeing where you land. And your program, as it's designed right now, might be meeting those needs, but are there opportunities for development, reconstruction, modularization, et cetera? So comments or questions, insights people want to share regarding any of that? So again, this course construction worksheet, hopefully you found the exercise of going through this helpful. And I want to just talk a little bit more about that thinking of leveling and using that foundation that you have and kind of applying all the different, or processing all the varied factors within your institution and externally that could influence your reconstruction of your program. So one of the things, and this is a nice connection to what you were talking about earlier, Kira, all competencies are not the same in terms of content covered. And I mean, we can think of that as a mass issue. And it's something, and I think the example that you just gave is a really perfect one, is some kind of expand more broadly. I often will use the example of, HGG1 understands developmental milestones, and then HG2 is just, it's not just, but it's understanding the interrelationship between those milestones, which is a much more micro concept than that whole broad understanding of all of developmental milestones across early childhood. There are likely logical limits to the number of competencies included in courses. And I put the word likely in there because it just seems like there probably are. So you might want to reflect on that. And so this idea of guardrails, and several of us were involved in a discussion yesterday, looking at kind of general parameters and guardrails. And that was really helpful and clarifying to me in terms of thinking about things like credit assigned to courses, which we'll be talking about today. Thinking about how to design things so they complement the existing system. So some existing guardrails, especially when we think about number of competencies initially, but it'll feed down into other things that we examine, are current alignments within IAI. So those are, again, I refer to IAI because there's been broad agreement and consensus around that. Right now in child growth and development, there are 6 competencies that are covered, and in family and community relationships, there are 5 competencies that are covered. And again, I'm referring to this information because it's just a nice referral point in terms of alignment. In the CDA, there are 6 competencies that are worth 6 credit hours. And I should note that both of those IAI courses are 3 credit hours. And the Gateways ECE framework can be an incredibly valuable guide. And I have that included on this page. So some of the things to think about, there are 12 competencies at level 2, 16 competencies at level 3, 14 at level 4, and 14 at level 5. So there's some continuity across each of the credential levels. I think one of the other things to think about, and again, this is a huge shift in thinking from before we move to a competency-based framework, individuals who are at programs at universities that include level 5 content also include level 4, level 3, and level 2. There's that responsibility for the whole of those competencies, which is a shift from previously just the level 5. Individuals at community colleges are responsible for levels 2, 3, and 4. And if the class is articulating to university under IAI, those level 5 competencies as well. So those are some just important things to keep in mind. I'm going to pause and see if there are any questions or comments that people want to share at this point.
Donna?
Yeah.
It's Paula. Can I just ask?
Oh, good.
I always get confused about what to do with classes now that they don't, especially with the AAS transferring. So like our observation and assessment course, that class has generally transferred fully to most 4-year programs. So we make sure that we include everything through level 5. But are you saying we should not?
No,
these, because it's not an IAI course. It's just a course that transfers fairly readily.
So I think that would be up to individual programs and articulating partners. I think one of the factors to consider is that if you include content through level 5, that content, and it's an articulating course, that content is not repeated again in terms of a design, so that those competencies, when the course transfers in, are, well, I'm just going to repeat myself, so I'll stop right there. And from a university perspective, if a community college where the course is accepted, right, that if they're level 2 through 4 competencies that are covered, that individuals at the university will get those level 5 competencies. So with IAI by design, we included those level 5 to kind of support that, but that was before the AAS transfer. One thing I'll mention, and this is just pretty, I mean, it's a little weedy, but one of the things that we did at Heartland was to kind of eliminate those potential redundancies, we have our competencies aligned to our Gateways credential for an AA pathway and an AAS pathway. And so in some ways that, as I said, eliminated redundancies. And with our closest transferring partner obviously is ISU. And so we worked with that AA pathway to ensure the elimination of redundancies overall. Joni, you look like you want to make a comment. Do you have okay. Paula, did that help?
It's just tough with the AAS transfer, and it actually was before, because like most of the schools are, I'm assuming at this point, since they have to take the AAS, like our observation and assessment course, which is an IAI. I mean, we're making sure that it's ready to go, because we're assuming that that's part of that first 60 hours that's automatically going, even if we don't like have agreements with schools like we used to have before.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, because any institution at the community college level in observation and assessment, it could be assumed that they would always be covering those level 2 through 4 competencies. So you might need to communicate with your, your most common transfer partner about, are they also covering those level 5 competencies if you have included them in your course? And if many of them are, then maybe taking out those level 5 competencies. So I think there would be some individual contextual factors that come into play there.
Paula, I would just add to comment that you're probably pretty fortunate, actually, if that those observation and assessment level 5 are fully articulating with some of your partners. There's enough challenges in the state in getting the IAI designated courses to fully articulate between our 2 and our 4 year. If you have additional courses beyond the IAI courses that also fully articulate with those level 5, in some ways I would say that might be a little bit of an anomaly, because we just don't have tons institutions who already articulate and include the level 5 competencies in the IAI courses. Often don't have a lot of 4-year partners who also recognize and fully transfer in additional courses with the level 5, because they're trying to map out their own, their own programs. So it might be unique. It might be kind of unique within your institution if you've got a specific partner you work with in that area.
Yeah, I mean, the big problem, I know Paula, on your end, the problem is your students probably transfer more than one place, right? So you have to design your courses some type of way. It can't be a way that meets all art, but on the receiving end, the issue is I don't have any evidence that the students have those competencies, right? Like you can tell me that, and maybe it's something about discreetly listing them in course descriptions, but we wouldn't, because your institution couldn't be entitled at the level 5, I wouldn't be able to quickly look online and be like, oh yeah, those competencies have been met. It would require to your point, a specialized articulation agreement.
That's an excellent point. I think the idea of that clarity and communication across institutions, which is one of the, we'll get into it a little bit today with in institutions, but I think that's such an important point to raise. Other comments? So I wanted to touch briefly on structural implications. So some of the things to think about within an institution is, are there institutional parameters for how many credits a credential needs to have to qualify for financial aid? And I'm going to give you a couple examples. Many community colleges, for example, have a 16 credit hour requirement, and that really influenced initial pathway design. And I'm going to talk about what that might map into with the program, but checking that out if that is a specific requirement at your institution or not. One of the things that we have discussed across these workshops is that isolating the level 2 credential might be kind of the, I don't want to say lowest hanging fruit, but it might be one of the most fruitful ways to just support completion, recruitment, setting individuals on a pathway. That's where, for example, PLA typically lies at the beginning. If I think about the immersion assessments, it targets those 12 individual competencies. That's where we have pathways set up relative to the CDA, for example. So there's some benefit to isolating the level 2. The other thing that we discussed connected to that is that for individuals who lack a degree and credential, that might be a really important lever in the context of Smart Start and some of the discussions that are happening around that. So that's one of the things to think about structurally, internally. How can you configure modularized courses so they create a clear pathway? And again, that important point of eliminating redundancies. And, you know, one of the challenges I have is that it might be really clear in my mind, and you have to also make sure that it is really clear to all stakeholders. And that requires, we're going to talk about today, a lot of connecting points with different lenses of expertise that individuals might bring to that pathway clarity. So there are some different options. Mapping to parent courses, and we're going to revisit that, is one particular option. And then the opportunity to create unique courses. So I have some visuals that I'll show you relative to that. And thinking about, is there a rationale for not modularizing some courses? So if you have a strong rationale, you know what, I think there would be huge benefit to modularizing particular courses, but also thinking about, you know what, this course, I don't see benefit to modularizing, and here is why. So thinking about it in that context, but making sure that there's a rationale across the pathway for what you choose to do and what you choose not to do. Comments about any of that? Now, I know you're looking at the slide and thinking, why did you not go into marketing, Jana? This is like so stunning in its presentation, which I did my best, I know. I thought the colors was a nice little ad, but yeah, I struggle. So there are two examples. The one on the left, which we talked about last week, is the idea, or last session, is the idea of, here's your parent syllabus. So a parent syllabus might be child 102, growth and development of the young child. And for those of you that are intimately familiar with the HGD competencies, you'll know that there are competencies included that are at level 2, that are at level 3, and that are at level 5. There aren't specific, or I might have flipped that. It might be 2, 4, and 5, but one of the levels is missing in that context. Kira, I'm looking at you. Do you remember which one is missing in the, I can refer to the framework.
No, Jana, I'm like trying to find my quick placemat. Like, I think I need to always have the credential placemat in front of me, because while I used to have all those memorized for you, I do not. Sorry.
It's 2, 4, and 5.
Yeah, it's 3 that doesn't have HGD.
Okay, thank you.
Well, and whoever has that
placemat.
Marie, if you have that, put it in the chat. I think that everybody, like, if we, Joni, that might be a helpful thing, is like, always put that in the chat at the start of the meetings, because then we all have that up at the same time.
You know what? Thank you. That's a great suggestion. Okay, so in this case, there are no level 3 competencies with HGD. So you'll know right away if you're in a modularize, well, there's opportunities at level 2. There are not opportunities at level 3, and there are potential opportunities at level 4 and 5. So this parent syllabus on the side here, one choice an individual might decide to make is to isolate those level 2 competencies in that green on the right, and then blend, for example, those level 3 and 4 competencies on the left. And I only mention this in this case because that's how they're bundled within IAI. And so that's why I'm using that as a specific example. So the first syllabus is duplicative of part of the parent syllabus. The second syllabus is duplicative of part of the child 1 plus child 2 syllabus. Those two together comprise that parent syllabus. Another option is to take those level 2 competencies, isolate them, take those level 4 competencies, isolate them in that orange in the middle, and then take those blue and isolate the level 4. The example that I'm giving here is based on a semester hour example. And depending on your pathway needs, you might eliminate that parent course. And I'll give you one of the examples that I'll show you later. Relates to some of the modularization that we did at Heartland, where we eliminated the parent course from the curriculum. In another case, we kept that parent course. And in cases where we elected to keep the parent course, it's because the course was part of both the transfer and the AAS pathway. So it made sense to keep them both together. The course where we eliminated the parent course, it just didn't make any sense. It was an option within the context of both pathways. One was an elective and the other was a required course with a series of courses within the AAS. So I'm going to pause again and ask for comments or insights, questions related to this.
I want to say thank you for clarifying that, because I've really been struggling with this, why keep the parent syllabus? Why not just create the separate courses? Because right now I am working on my family child care credentialing. And so I started out actually with a parent syllabus, for this one course. And then as I got to thinking about it, I was like, oh, this really would make more sense for me to modularize this family child care course and put my 2 and 3 in one level of it, and then my 4 in the other 1 credit hour piece of the course. And then I was like, well, do I need to keep that parent course? Can I only have those? So I think this is really helping me to figure out, and I see now what you're saying, so that my intro to early childhood education, my foundations of early childhood, that's a course that if I were to decide to modularize, I would really want to keep that, because that is in my AA as well as in my AAS. So it would benefit those people, to have those child courses if they were just wanting to get their level 2 or level 3, and they could do that. But if they're going to get that AAS or, that AA, they're really going to want that parent syllabus, and the AAS, they could take both classes separately. So this just really, this helps. I think I was just really struggling with this, and now it's like a light bulb came on. So thank you.
No, well, thank you, because that was a great example of thought processes behind modularizing and deep thought processes around when you might not modularize, in terms of the parent course as well as keeping a parent course in that case. So I think that, thank you for bringing that up. I want to show an example. Is there other comments before I might be scrolling ahead a little bit. I am scrolling ahead. So I just wanted to show this brief example, and hopefully you can all see it, or smush your faces into your screen so that you can see this. But you can see here, this is an example at our level 2. We do have a 16-hour credit hour requirement within the context of that. But one of the things, and I'll see if I can expand this slide a little bit. I can't. One of the things that I just want to note is that if you look at Child 102, which is our growth and development of the young child class, that is a part of both of our AAS as well as our AA pathways. And you may or may not be able to see that tiny little P next to it. And that P indicates that there is a prerequisite or placement requirement on that particular class. And that means there's required English placement or concurrent or previous enrollment in our English 101, which is our foundational class. For many of our students, that's a barrier. For some of our students, that place, they can enter right into that class. So one of the additional reasons for modularizing child growth and development of the young child, as we did, was so that individuals who, as I've mentioned before, are developing their English literacy skills, they can still be enrolled in those foundational level 2 competencies. It made sense in this case to keep that parent course as well as modularize it. The other thing that I'll just say briefly, if you look here, you can see Child 124, which is curriculum in early childhood settings. The foundational curriculum competencies are at level 3, but because we have that requirement for so many credit hours to meet financial aid requirements, as opposed to putting in an elective that may or may not contribute to their pathway in terms of competencies needed, we borrowed from level 3. And those of you who were involved, as I know many of you were, in that initial pathway work that was done at the community college level, as well as the university level. But at the community college level, that was the strategy that was utilized, to borrow from the next level to ensure that individuals had those competencies. That class in our curriculum, before we modularized it, we used to have a class that was numbered Child 105. It was curriculum and early childhood programs. Once we modularized it, we had 124, and you'll see later a course called 125. We did that to separate out those competencies, as I mentioned, but there was no need to have that parent course anymore. There wasn't a prerequisite on that parent course. It was just a kind of confusing redundancy. So we eliminated cold that Child 105 course. Comments about this, and we're going to loop back on this a little bit later, but I thought it connected well to the point that was raised.
I just want to say this is really, really helpful to see now how you piece this together and how that lays out with both the option of the parent course or the kind of section that the student needs. So thank you for this.
Oh, good. I'm so glad to hear that. I'm so glad to hear that. I'll show you an example at level 3, but we'll loop back on that as well. So other comments.
A question?
Yeah.
And this might be too weedy for right now. Maybe you want to wait until you've shown a couple courses, but I'm wondering about how these get transcribed. If are you bringing them in as course waivers? Are you transcribing these as actual courses with variable credit, or like the course prefix and name and variable credit, and then maybe how that affects any like residency or graduation requirements that your institution has?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think totally appropriate to talk about now. So if you look at that Child 102 or Child 121, Child 121 is worth 2 credit hours, and Child 102 is worth 3 credit hours. And that is, if you could see my pointer, which you can't, in kind of the center part of that. We went back and forth, about arranging via columns. One of the points I had made was that, well, it looks like Child 102 is worth 2 credit hours, but so they put the 2 to 3 credit hours, but that credit hour rating is assigned to each individual course. If individuals, and I think I pulled an example of this, we talked about this once before, but if not, I'll send it out in the materials I send afterwards. If individuals take both Child 121 and 122, it is transcribed as 102 on their transcript. So 121 plus 122 equals 102. If they just take 121, that is just what's transcribed on their transcript.
And then just for clarity, like on this end, when we're thinking about credentials and content, we know what's in these courses. Like we know whether you're taking, 102 or 121. If it's 102, we know which competencies are in that coursework because of the way John has done our program layout. If we see Child 121, we know what competencies are in that class. So it's very clear on this end exactly when we're looking at a transcript. We got a course, we know the amount of credit, we know exactly which competencies were taught in that class. So it's very clear for our purposes.
And then can students see this? Like if you have an external facing degree plan, and like it is in your course catalog is what I'm actually trying to ask.
Yes.
And so how do students know which course to choose, right?
Well, so similar to any course plan, there's always that additional layer of communication. So one of our really critical partners has been enrollment services, in terms of, not only do we have this program plan, but how can we communicate as effectively as possible on the program plan? And then what does that translate into in terms of guidance provided by enrollment services? So the note we have at the bottom in red, and I'll just read that because I know it's like tiny. So modularized courses are variable offerings, and variable doesn't mean variable credit in this context. It means, not necessarily always tied to fall and spring. They're tied to individual student needs. They could be offered in fall, spring, and summer. It just is kind of pending on needs that are best suited for those who are currently working in the early childhood field and interested in pursuing a specific credential on an accelerated basis, because these do tend to accelerate their pathway. Please contact your academic advisor or the early childhood department for additional information. We really went back and forth. It is something that requires additional explanation. And the way that we have this set up when we are offering these courses, we have them set up so that on the schedule, they require a discussion with an academic advisor prior to enrollment. Leslie, I saw you nod your head. Other comments or questions about this?
Jonah, like it's not a question, it's kind of like my own reflection. But by the way, thank you so much for sharing examples. Actually, this helps me see how the pieces are woven together and how what competencies are included. But this actually makes me think of like how these courses could be transferred to our institution, kind of like question, like, because we do not have that, like our courses are developed with like different levels of competencies all together, not really like modularized or not really like only one competency level for this course. So this kind of really makes me think about like how if we have a student with this kind of like courses on their transcript, how can we help them? Like how can we transfer, like give them the credit for our courses? So thank you for the opportunity though.
So, and I think that is such a great insight. So one of the realities is that if an individual takes child 121 and not 102, chances are, well, that's a requirement for the level 4. So they haven't completed their level 4. So they might transfer in a different way, but it's without completion of that credential, which would always prompt a more individualized review of where the students at and what they have specifically taken without that level 4. The other thing I'll say, as I've mentioned before, we have the competencies listed on our individual syllabi to add that kind of additional lens of clarity. But the other thing that I think is connected to your point in an important way is that if you remember at our first modularization workshop, we looked at how what is in multiple institutions. I gave, I think, 4 examples from 4 different institutions. What is in the child growth and development class? And it was a lot of different things in terms of competencies. And some there were 3 competencies, and some there were 6 competencies, and some there were 2 HGD competencies and an IRE competency. And they were all worth 3 credit hours, and they all 3 had the same title on it. So we're dealing with a system that has variability, and of course it does. We can't require every course be the same. IAI kind of establishes that. So I think that this is another potential variability with as much transparency added to syllabi, et cetera, that communicates exactly what's in those courses. Because the reality is we don't all have the same curriculum, even if the title is the same. And I think that's just one of the messy parts of having a system, that values, various pathways at individual institutions. But to try to clarify that as much as possible, I think is incredibly important. Reactions to that? I saw some noddings of heads, but do people want to comment on that or react to that?
Well, Young, as you were talking, I was thinking about how students transfer into DePaul. And I, as program director, I don't know much about what they're transferring in initially anyway. At least they could be here a quarter before I know much about them, just because of the way we do it, right? So all transfers get looked at by people in the registrars, admissions and registrars offices. Even our lead academic advisor for our program doesn't necessarily get to see a transfer student's full transcript until, there could be a lag of as much as a month. And so when you were talking, I was thinking, holy Moroni, I got to change that system, that intake system. Because we're going to, with this new way of doing things, at least new for us, as Jonna was talking to, I'm thinking I have to have a lot of deep conversations with people and re-engineer things. So I'm glad you brought that up. Like, okay, what's this going to look like when it comes to me? So thanks. Thank you both, Jonna and Bo Young, for that.
Well, and I think your point is so well stated. So having registrars look at competencies if they're on syllabi, having registrars transfer based on level. There are a lot of different, but you're so right, that requires additional communication. So if we know an individual is bringing in a level 2, what does that mean in the context of our curriculum? If we know they have, 2 courses from another community college or university, are the competencies on the curriculum? And if not, we have a good system where if there are questions, they just send things over to me. And so, it's kind of part of that evolving within the context of variability.
It's the time lag that concerns me most. I don't want anybody starting a course that she doesn't need, That's what I'm concerned about. So yeah, it's the timing.
Yeah, that's a great point. Other comments? I'm going to loop back to the couple slides.
I do have a question.
Yeah, please.
So, as I've been thinking about this, and it does make it more clear, like when you can have the standalone modularized courses and when to have the parent and the child. The parent and the child course construct really kind of scares me a little bit. I'm like, ooh, if that's the way I'm going to have to go, I don't know that I want to do that. I just don't know that my institution can handle it. So I guess what my ask is there a reason why we can't always just do the standalone modularized courses? Because I'm thinking, okay, I gave the example of my Foundations of Early Childhood course. Is there a reason why I couldn't do like a 2 credit and a 1 credit just child courses that are now standalone? We don't even have a parent course with it now. They're just their own courses. And those are in my AA as well as my AAS. And then of course the credentialing wherever they fall. Is there a reason why we shouldn't do that? And we should have a parent course?
No, I don't think so at all. I think that's a great description. And one of the things that I had mentioned was if I had to do it all over again, or if I were about to do it again now, I would likely eliminate those parent courses. And I'm not sure. I'd have to really deeply think about, is there a reason to keep them, right? And my initial is that no, but and again, that kind of, where is your institution internally? So I did this, maybe it was 3 years ago, where it was it was a stretch, but I think the language of competencies across different disciplines is a little bit more common parlance amongst institutions. There's more of a movement towards it. And so, yeah, I think that there's not necessarily a good reason not to do it that way.
Wait a second, when you say get rid of it, you two, are you talking about eliminating it from your catalog or?
So culling a course. And so
Really
and with
eliminating it from the, I'm just, because I'm thinking of like transferology, which is national, right? I'm just thinking of what happens if we start getting rid of courses. Or am I missing an elemental aspect of this conversation here?
Well, so when you call a course, you can still see that referring course. So if an individual came through
Right,
with
so
that,
you're still going to have the referring course. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure that you were still somewhere holding, when you were saying get rid of it, you were holding on to the referring course. That's all. Okay, I was picturing my registrar's face when you said that, Jonna, and I thought she'll kill me for even
So-
suggesting it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can think
Leslie?
I'm all good. I'm all good.
where you could get into trouble that way, April, and then it's like not solvable. It's just things to look out for, right? One is if the courses that you're talking about are aligned for, are part of your licensure program, if you change the courses significantly enough, it might trigger a new program application to ISB. So that's something that you might want to be like conscientious about. The other thing that I'm thinking about is that if you're working with transfer partners that bundle credentials, modularizing the credentials might not work for students who want to transfer, right? So like if I have all of my IDC and ITC and ECE competencies in separate courses, but I'm receiving coursework from an institution that has like a child development course that covers level 2 infant through age 8, now I've got a problem for receiving that course from a transfer perspective, right? Because I can't necessarily pull it in as 2 separate full credit courses, even though I know the student has met those competencies. It's a tricky thing that I'm still trying to figure out how best to address.
I think that's an interesting point. So the idea that this plus this equals this, because that's what we're used to within the context of the system. At the same time, maybe you don't offer what it's equal to, right? Maybe it just refers maybe it remains the transferring course that appears on the transcript. Yep. For the purpose of articulation purposes. But I think that's
creative, right? Like I could take in credit for child development, and let's say my infant toddler is another course, I could bring that in as a elective under like a special topics and then do a course waiver for them, right? But like to Marie's point, you got to really be friends with your registrar to be able to get those kind of things going. And you've got to make sure those courses that you're listing for waivers aren't things that are required for graduation or for residency in such a way that it affects the student's ability to graduate.
Really good points. And, I've mentioned before, the people that I work most with at my institution are the registrar and the person who's in charge of scheduling and pathways. They're like the 2 go-to people because it's innovative, different. So I'm going to, I'm sorry, go ahead. No,
I was just going to say, I think, I'm a little bit, I think lucky in that I came into John Wood just a couple of years ago. We're needing to redo all of our articulation. I had to redo all of our ECE credentials. So we're doing some, where you guys, I think, are so far ahead of where we are. I think that's lucky for me in some ways because I can build things from where we are. But I think my question is, if I were to say, make foundations of early childhood, course 1, that is, levels 2 and 3, for the Gateways ECE, and then foundations of early childhood levels 2, which is a 1 credit hour, and that gets them their 4 and their 5 credentials so that it would transfer into my 4-year partners. So Leslie, you're saying that you feel like that could be an issue you taking in my student, let's say my student wants to attend your college, that could be an issue for you seeing that as my previous 3 credit hour Foundations of Early Childhood.
The issue isn't so much the course waiver, right, of not having the student do the repeatability. The issue is that I can't take your credit twice. So if I'm accepting a 3 semester hour course for transfer and it counts as content that I have across 2 courses, I can't double dip there, right? So the student I can do a course waiver that says now the student doesn't have to take my level 2 infant toddler course. What I cannot do is give them additional credits to count towards graduation. And now we've got a problem, right, with the student having to take a million electives. And so what you've got to do is then be strict on the receiving institution end. I need to be real strategic about how I set up my electives, right? So that's meaningful, right? Can I do something like embedding the ESL endorsement into the degree program so that they can use that as electives instead of just taking random early childhood courses that they probably don't need more of, right? Or can I offer additional credentials, like maybe they want to add a family childcare credential, right? And then can I have courses that lead to that? You probably wouldn't have bundled those courses together, but it is a little bit tricky. The other if the receiving institution is doing it by level, right? Because what I really want to prevent is a student who is eligible for a credential. Let's say that that's an infant toddler credential 2 through 4, but has a bachelor's degree in early childhood, from having to redo competencies related to those lower infant toddler credentials. But I still need to have an infant toddler pathway where somebody who's never taken any infant toddler coursework can start at the beginning. So how do I keep from now I'm going to pretend I'm my dean, right? If I have courses that are at the infant toddler level 2 and 3, how do I keep them full? Knowing that most of my students are coming from you and I'm already going to have those. Now I've got kind of a scheduling problem more so than I have a transfer problem.
Okay, thank you.
I wonder if, based on what you just said, Leslie, and again, this is an idea, this is going to vary institutionally, but some of what you're saying, we've been talking about like the isolation of the level 2, but particularly with the AAS transferring. If individuals have their level 4, universities might have a rationale for isolating that level 5 as well. So if individuals come in with the level 4, you have these isolated level 5 competencies and courses that would eliminate the alignment issues that you described in terms of transfer.
It eliminates it for one program, but doesn't eliminate it for bundled credentials, right? For students who are, and so the reason I even got here is because I'm trying to reduce the amount of courses that my students have to take in order to be able to get multiple credentials, because they want multiple credentials. Sure. I would love to have a bachelor's degree where they graduate with not taking any additional courses, but they have a ECE level 5 and then some ITC credential, right? Maybe a 3 or 4, maybe it is a level 5, right? But if I'm designing for transfer, I can't do that because I don't know what level they're coming in at. I can't bundle those competencies back. I can't have an ECE and ITC course. It's like to your point, Jonna, it's going to be better. It's going to depend on your institution, your context, what kind of students, but you can't do both at the same time.
Right. And if you had a solid rule transfer at level 4, for example, that might beget one set of solutions. If you had a 60-hour transfer, that might beget another set of solutions. So yeah, thank you. Let me loop up here just to this internal partners and messaging. So you really think that there's the partners that'll support you in the design process and the partners that will support you in the communication process. And so if we think about design, so what are the existing institutional processes? There are varying names for curriculum and academic standards committee, but what are the requirements, and what are the requirements for reporting to ISBE, ICCB, IBHE, So what kinds of parameters exist? I'll mention that at the community college level, we did not have to submit a whole new program. We just had to submit a program update form. And one of the one of the videos that I sent you after the first workshop talked about just what processes were involved, what forms were involved, et cetera. So I'll just refer to that, and who supports those processes. And I just want to mention, I worked most extensively, as I said, with our registrar and our pathways process. And, it was challenging work, but both their lenses were like, I love this. This is so exciting because it was novel and different. And I know that is like how incredibly fortunate, right? To not have somebody who's like, oh no, but the idea of, that lens. And so as modularizing courses is innovative, who do you need to communicate with to ensure smooth process and messaging? So who are going to be your critical partners and ensuring that they understand it? So when there are tables that are convening, discussing this work that you're not at, that you have built informed advocates who can speak to the work as well. And so I just listed some key partners there, and that scheduling, because of variable offerings, because the modularization opened up individual pathways, that scheduling becomes really important. So in terms of communication, how will you ensure your pathways are clear within your program to learners, to enrollment services, to the records department? And one thing that I wanted to talk about that, again, is going to vary by institution is how does modularization impact faculty workload? So really thinking about at an institutional level, what that is going to mean. So we're unionized at Heartland. And so, I can say that I'm going to do all kinds of things, and my dean's like, well, where does that fit within the contract, right? And so I have to be cognizant and aware of where that fits. So is there floating load? Do you have any flexibility around, like at Heartland, there's program administration. And so initially that was where kind of individual students would go through. I will mention we're just about getting to the point where one of the things I did was carefully document time, because as we're moving towards this, not only what does this mean in terms of all these different pathways, but what does it mean in terms of time, and how does that translate into load? Does it translate as an independent study for 5 to 6 students? Does that translate into a full course load? Just thinking about those individual things, which again, some institutions have a lot more flexibility than others, but I think the idea of documentation is incredibly important. Comments or questions?
Jonna, that might be a really nice place to see examples. Today, your examples have been so enlightening. And I know that this is like, I think sharing with Amy Kelly, our lesson planning, like this is where with our practice, we don't share enough about the specifics of our programs that just shed light on other ways of being, where you guys have figured out the workload end of it would be an awesome, like you are so good with the infographics and the visuals, Jonna, but like that'd be an awesome visual to see how you all have figured out those parent and child courses when it's 1 credit hour. And as you very casually just mentioned in your stream of talking, how students can take these at various points, that I think has our minds just like, what? Like various, thank you, Marie. Various points, and who is teaching that class? As I mentioned, I have moved offices because we've lost so many faculty members. And so, but women, I know that like we are all across this room. We are some of us sole people in our programs, and I am not even one to complain because I have wonderful colleagues here. But as I think about load, that's a really big question, and I think seeing actual examples might be so helpful. Sorry, I get silly.
No, thank you. I will pinpoint that for next time. So thank you. I think that again, it might have to be tailored to your individual institutional processes. But yeah, I'll pull up examples and some of the discussion we had around how we're doing it right at this point in time, which like everything else, can continue to evolve, right? So I showed you this example at level 2, and I mentioned to you that we borrowed level 3 competencies, the curriculum, and I failed to note, but we also borrowed observation and assessment competencies from level 2 or level 3, excuse me. So I just wanted to put a pin in that as we move to our example of level 3. And so with any kind of program document, my preferred layout is like you have your level 2 and you add X, Y, and Z, but we're required because of PeopleSoft to list out all the requirements in the program plan. So I just want to call your attention to the idea that there's that list of courses. It is the same list as the level 2 credential, with the exception of English 101 is required at level 3. Our early childhood math class or college level math is also required, and an IAI general education course is required. So individuals at level 2 can attain the full of their level 2 competency. They can pick up their level 3 competencies. And again, that's a financial aid requirement that we have that 16-hour. So then at level 3, they're adding their general education requirements to that pathway. So I'm going to pause and see if there are comments or questions about this. And I'll just mention again, we did a research study, it was a year ago probably, with which of those general education classes that early childhood students were most likely to enroll in, what presented challenges when we had individuals who attained their level 2 but did not successfully complete those gen ed courses. What were some of the obstacles that were undertaken? And one of the challenges that we identified was all the courses, English, and you would think logically English, as well as psych was a really common course in the pathway. And we pulled from all the common pathway courses. We're evaluating writing over and over and over again. So the idea of, if you want to demonstrate that you have understanding of foundational theories of psychology, all writing to assess it. And if that's a challenge for students, we could identify that as a really big barrier in terms of progression. And our general education faculty were fantastic about figuring out adaptations to the curriculum. So individuals were demonstrating what they know and are able to do in very authentic ways. So external partners and messaging, the Gateway's annual update form, which has been sent previously, and I can attach again when I send out kind of a follow-up from our discussion today. And I'll also mention that there was a request to send examples of exactly what our syllabi look like in terms when we have a parent class, and the 2 child classes off of it, as some of our classes have. So I'll send an example of that as well. So in terms of what I thought we could utilize our time for today, and I'm going to look at my watch, our remaining 15 minutes. I thought breaking into groups seems like it's been fruitful in terms of where you're at with your individual program, addressing any questions. So if people are comfortable, we will do that again. And I'm having all kinds of problems with my cursor. But if people are comfortable, we'll do that again. And I saw heads nodding. And so Stephanie, if you can, I know what to do. Okay. If you would be willing to get us into our groups. And I thought, just for the purposes of our discussion today, general reactions and where you're at. So really talking about where you are, any specific questions that have bubbled up, and we'll all kind of move from room to room, Joni, Stephanie, and I, and Julie, just to see what kind of questions are coming up to take note for next time, as well. If there's anything that can be addressed immediately, we'll do that as well. So everybody good with the plan? Okay. All right, Stephanie, if you can like send us away. And so we can just pick, how will we make sure we all pick? Let me see. There are 4, 8, 12, 13, 14. What if I say if you're in the top row, but we all have different rows, don't we? Okay.
Do you want me to start just putting people in rooms and?
You know what? That would be really great. I'm terrible about finding
I can do
people into groups. Okay, thank you. That'd be fabulous.
Mhm. Ah.
Well,
Did everybody leave? It's 11.
I don't know.
I'm not sure if we were supposed to come back to the main session and say goodbye, or if we were going to be leaving from the room. So I thought everyone could come back, but it
I'm
is
here.
it is
Hello. I
time.
thought we were
So
coming
Okay,
back.
but people are leaving. I know, I thought we were gonna all, but you're right, people could go, it is time. So you know what, I'm so appreciative of, in our little group, I have oh, here everybody's coming back. A list of things to bounce back on. Hi. We didn't know it's time, so we weren't sure if everybody, I'll just comment. Several things have come up over the course of today. Some I'll send out tomorrow, as I mentioned. Additional information, alignment information. There were requests to see what a Canvas shell might look, or Blackboard shell, whatever case it is, of a course, as well as that's been modularized, as well as sample syllabi. And Kira, you had listed several things earlier as well. So I took note of everything. What I'd like to ask everyone to do is that if you have, you know what, this would be really helpful in the last session, or you know, if you can send an example of this. Again, I want to emphasize, as I mentioned, we did this a few years ago, and it really has significantly increased our course completions. I just want to mention that in the past year, we've seen double from the year before. So it's been beneficial. I just want to emphasize that. Were we to do it again, we might choose, and again, that requires the deep thought in the context of your program, but the idea that different modularization patterns, I think, are suggested. So, but you'll see after your deep thought what's best for your program. So this, I always so look forward to this, and the just rich discussions we have and conversations, and thank you each.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Jenna.
So
So
take
good
care,
to see
everybody.
everybody.
Yeah, we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Bye-bye.